All right, Stephen. It says we are live on the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. So, Stephen Roblee, captain of the Michigan Tech research vessel Agassiz, welcome to Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm having fun.
Very good to have you with us tonight. Very good to have you with us. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes just for people to join and start, logging in. If you're online, drop us a message so I can see what the people are online and messaging us. So just to let everybody know the format for tonight, we're going to have a good long hour-long discussion interview with Captain Roblee, and we're going to talk about a wide-ranging group of topics, and then we're going to take your questions as well at the end. So don't be shy about asking them. Let me just see if I can get up the chat. All right, and let me just check the site and make sure we're live. Yeah, we are definitely live. Cool. And we've got a number of people joining us.
Good.
Excellent. All right. Well, Captain Roblee, I can tell you I was out on Isle Royale last summer, and I remember with my little boat, and the Agassiz was docked at the dock right next to us there at Rock Harbor, and I remember thinking, what an impressive looking vessel that was, and I remember it pretty well. For those of you who don't know, my dad was a professor at Michigan Tech, where Captain Roblee has also been a professor for now retired for many years. And as it turns out, we used to play hockey every once in a while in the same pickup games. And I saw you at Isle Royale there, and I wondered if that was you, and I didn't know for sure, so I was a little shy. I didn't come up and say hi. I kind of wish that I had. Yeah, definitely. So, Stephen, one of the things I ask all the guests that I think is really fascinating for our audience is, tell me a little bit about how you developed an interest in, maritime things, and how you became captain of the Agassiz, and how you developed your interest in the history of the area up there.
Well, from the time that I moved there when I was 23 years old, I was always fascinated with history. And so I've done a lot of reading of the history of the area, not so much about shipwrecks until later on. So, at any rate, the way I became a captain was that I had been a boater all my adult life. I had a sailboat, which I actually still have, and I sailed all over the Great Lakes and all over Lake Superior, every part of Lake Superior. So I got to know the lake pretty well, and a lot of experience on boats. So as I was getting close to retirement from my job as a professor, I wanted to have a kind of a retirement job. And so at that time, they were building the Agassiz. And I knew the fellow that was in charge of the contract for the Agassiz, and I asked him if they'd like to have a backup captain. And he said yes. And then I went to the actual captain at the time, and I said, "Do you want a backup captain?" And he said, "Sure, I'm going to retire pretty soon." And then I went to my dean, and he said, "Sure, yeah, you should do this if you want to, and we'll back you up." And anyway, I went through the process of getting a captain's license, and that was in 2002. And then starting in 2003, I was the backup captain for about 3 years, and I still taught for a few more years after that. And for a few years, I was both the captain of the boat and a professor, and I kind of shared duties there. And after a while, I just sort of started doing more of the boat stuff and less in the classroom. And eventually I just retired and I became the full-time captain. I became the head captain in 2005 and I retired in 2008, and then I was a full-time captain on the Agassiz. And we only operate that vessel from May 1st to November 15th. And so the rest of the year I live in Florida.
So tell me a little bit about the Agassiz. I mean, it's a really impressive vessel. Let me see if I can bring up a picture of it real.
Okay. The Agassiz was built in 2002 in Raleigh, Massachusetts by the company called Winning Off Boatworks.
Real quick. Here.
And they built commercial vessels, a lot of the vessels for commercial fishing on the East Coast. But basically, this is the similar to be like a crab or a lobster boat on the East Coast or a commercial fishing boat. Big wide deck, twin engine diesels. It's a fast boat because sometimes we have to cover a lot of distance to get our work done in a day. So we can do about 24 knots in that boat under the right conditions. But we don't normally do that.
It's really one of the most impressive science platforms on the Great Lakes. Can you tell me a little bit about all the different types of science capabilities and remote sensing stuff that's on board?
Well, okay, I'll just really focus on the remote sensing gear that we've been accumulating over time. I think the first thing we got was a Rove, and that was an Outland Tech Rove 1000. We now have two of those, and that's the first piece of remote sensing equipment we got. We now have a new Rove, actually. It's called a Blue Robotic. It's called a Trident. We haven't actually tried it out yet, but it's available for this year. Maybe we'll have a chance to use that. I think the next piece of equipment that we got was side scan sonar, and that was an EdgeTech 4125. It runs at 400 and 900 dual frequency kilohertz. We got about 1,000 feet of cable for that thing, and we can run it down to about 100 meters. And then after that, we got a hold of an Iver 3, which is an autonomous underwater vehicle. And that thing can operate up to about 100 meters. And that operates at a higher frequency. It's a dual frequency, 600, 1600 kilohertz. And so this is the kind of stuff we've been using lately. Initially, none of this stuff was ever used for shipwrecks. We had other jobs for all this stuff. Our job is a lot of it's remediation work from mining waste and rehabilitation of fish spawning areas. We do a lot of stuff in Buffalo Reef and Bay, and we do a lot of other types of sensing. But what we find was when we started using this gear for other purposes, every time we turned the stuff on, we'd find another shipwreck somewhere. So that's just, we found that stuff initially by accident. And so we got pretty good at just finding the stuff when we wanted to. So we found a lot of stuff right in the Keweenaw waterway. We found the barge down by Princess Point, just east of the campus. We talked about that one. That barge is history of that, but it's in fine shape. It's a total wooden barge. Every piece on there is all wood except for the fastenings. We found that just by testing our AUV one time. We run around with our side scan since we've been discovering more things. Sometimes we take people out and show them how the side scans work. We're looking at an image right now, which is a side scan image which was obtained using the AUV. That's a whole big pile of barges over there in Ripley, not too far from the Tech campus. And I think you and I talked once about have a theory about that. At one time, when we had the stamp mills in the Ripley area in Hancock, they would dump the stamp sand right into the Keweenaw waterway. And eventually, the Corps of Engineers said, "You're blocking the waterways." So then I think they started putting that stamp sand in the barges and dumping it somewhere else, dumping the waste sand out. I have a photograph of one of the mining companies actually loading those barges with stamp sand in right by Hancock near the bridge, on the Hancock side of the waterway, right near the bridge. I don't know where they put those, but my theory is barges there, and there's about 6 or 8 of them right there, may have been those barges they used to dump the stamp sand. Eventually, they moved all that milling work up into Torch Lake. Then perhaps these barges weren't needed anymore. But that's a theory, and that's never been proven. I mean, I haven't researched it far enough to figure out if that's true. That's my theory. What do you think?
Those barges are really interesting. We ran them over many years ago. We were out searching for the Mendota Dredge off of Rabbit Island, and we got weathered out. We had to go into the waterway, and we had Harry Zeich, an old-time wreck hunter from Chicago, with us with a pretty good Klein side scan. And so we painted the whole Keweenaw waterway. That was back in the 90s. We ran over those barges, and we certainly didn't get a good view like you have here. They look pretty nebulous. So we had Steve Radovan with us, an old-time wreck hunter from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and he did a bounce dive on those, and it was pitch black down there. One of those days where the canal was like chocolate milk. We never did figure out what they were. I think your theory is right on that they're stamp sand barges and probably discarded. They're right off the old Joseph Crow's shipyard. There's a marine railway. You can still see the narrow gauge rails leading into the
Yeah.
waterway there.
Was that what
But
the Crow's shipyard?
it was, I think, and he had his marine railway there where he would be able to haul a bigger vessel out if he wanted to. And these are right off of there. And it seems to me like he wanted to get rid of them. It was 1910. The EPA didn't exist. A pretty convenient way to just put them off the drop off.
Yeah. Just to the right, on the right edge of the image you're looking at right there is where a Ripley Creek comes down. And Ripley Creek was the creek that had that big flood issue there in 2018. And we had images of these barges before the flood, and they were actually more clear. But I think the flood brought a lot more sediment down there on top of these barges, so the image is not as good now as it was before 2018. So, anyway, that's what the barge. There's probably 6 or 8 of them right there, and there are other barges that we found in other places too.
So the next thing I've got up here is I've got an image of this autonomous underwater vehicle that you guys have on the Agassiz. I've always been fascinated by these things. I think these are kind of the key to finding a lot of these deep shipwrecks that would otherwise take a lot of time to find. Can you tell us a little bit about the AUV, what it is, what it does?
Well, it's autonomous. What you do is you figure out what your search pattern needs to be before you go anywhere with it. You pre-program it in the lab. This is sitting right there in the lab where you pre-program it. You just put in a whole series of waypoints, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 waypoints. And then when they're all programmed in there, you bring it to the starting point, you throw it over the side, you turn it on, and it takes off. It'll run to 100 meters. We're picking up images 600, 1600 kilohertz, so it's a little higher frequency than our side scan. And dives down to whatever preset depth you want to set it for. It'll go for probably I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes or 6, 7 minutes, and it pops back up. That orange thing sticking up on top is the GPS antenna, and it picks up a GPS signal to find out where it is, and then it automatically recorrects for the next waypoint. It gets back on track. So every 5, 6 minutes, it's coming up to get a new position, goes back down, recorrects, continues on. And they say this thing can run on a 6-hour path, but I kind of doubt it off the batteries that have ever been tested to that limit. But we run it for, half an hour, 2 hours. And eventually, after it runs that whole route, they'll come back up on the surface and they'll pop up right where it says it's supposed to be. Once it's on the surface, we have a remote controller to drive it around to where we want to bring it alongside the vessel, pick it up, put it back on board, bring it all back to the lab, download the data, that's the raw data that's on the side scan data, and we run it through usually something called Sonar Wiz. That's for post-processing. It stitches all this together, cleans up the image, gives you better images, it emphasizes the details you want to emphasize. So that's kind of how it works. It's a pretty expensive piece of equipment, but it's nice to have. It's very efficient in terms of time. If you want to do a lot of search, this is much more efficient than throwing around a side scan.
I'll bet. I think there's only one other that I know of that's up on Lake Superior. I think Tom Crossman has one. He's going to be a guest on our show here coming up. I don't know much about AUVs other than the fact that, you can, it's basically a side scan sonar without a boat and a cable, right?
That's about what it is. Yeah, that's what it is.
Very cool.
And these things that make them really efficient is you get a fleet of these things. So if you want to cover a very wide swath, well, not a wide swath, but a wide area, you'll put 4 or 5 of these things down. But they're so expensive, I think we're going to be using just one for quite a while. But the military has a plan where they want to use multiples of these to cover wide areas. So, and then you can really make it efficient. But then it's a lot of money.
Definitely. So I know we both have a real big interest in the Keweenaw waterway. I grew up there and grew up diving on the shipwrecks there. And we knew about a small handful of them when I was a young man, and we used to invent our own side scans. I remember Dan Fountain came with the Dan scan one year, and we were looking at these blobs on the, off on the side. It was a converted Vexilar sonar with the transducers turned out to the side,
Yeah.
and we couldn't see really anything. And we heard rumors, but nowadays, when you go out with the Agassiz and are just taking a pass through the waterway, you're finding rowboats, canoes. I mean, every little thing that's on the bottom you can see. That's amazing.
Sometimes when they use the EdgeTech side scan sonar for training purposes, or maybe we're demonstrating this for people who want to see how it works, we'll take a path. And we start at GLRC in Houghton there on the Houghton side and go across to the Hancock side and then turn back towards the bridge, turn west and run a path along the Ripley side to the bridge. And that's about a mile. Then we make a U-turn and come back with the side scan and get a scan on the Houghton side. And we've done this several times. And I'm just guessing in that 2 mile path, we'll pick up, I don't know, 10 or 15 or 18 various objects on the bottom that may have been boats, rowboats, canoes, some larger vessels. We always pick up the mediator when you come back towards campus because that's always sitting there. So there are some more wrecks on the Houghton side near that new motel there, and I've never imaged those.
It's a real area.
They say that they're there, but I have not seen them.
You there, Stephen?
I'm here.
Okay, I think we had a little hiccup there. That happens from time to time.
Yeah. So at any rate, most of the stuff that we've done with wrecks, we have found that by accident because we're doing something else basically. However, we have had some interesting jobs in the last couple of years, and we got contracted from NOAA. That was, I think, in 2017, and they had found a couple of wrecks over in the Thunder Bay Marine Sanctuary, and they asked us to come over after they've already located them. See, locating these things is always the time-consuming, difficult part. But they had located these things, and they said, "Can you bring your AUV over and scan them?" And we did. And I think you might have those images there. And one wreck they found over there that we imaged is called the Choctaw. And that's a whaleback, and that for one was lost there. I don't remember how that one got lost there, but anyway, there's an image that one there. That's a Choctaw, and on that one, what we're seeing right there is it's mostly buried. However, I think if we look close enough in there, we can find. I think we find about 2/3 of it sticking out of the mud, and 1/3 of it's down in the mud there. And I think it's upside down, and that would be the Choctaw. And then we also imaged what I think, or they think, is the Ohio. And the Ohio was a schooner barge, and I think it was in a tow. And there was a collision, and that one sank right there in that area in the Thunder Bay, somewhere north of Alpena, I think about 15 miles out from Alpena. And you may have that image there too. I'm not sure, but I think you do. So that was, I think, what they decided they thought was the Ohio based upon the design and the dimensions. So there's one job. Another thing we did recently, this would have been last year in 2019. And we know that everybody's interested in the French minesweepers, the Sarasols and Inkerman, and they were lost in November 1918. Well, we're interested in that too, but the problem for us at working at the university is that we don't really get to choose the work we do. It's not like recreational work. So everything we do is paid for by the whoever's using the vessel. So unless somebody decides that we should be looking for something, some particular shipwreck, then we don't do it. I mean, we have to have a contract to do this sort of thing. I think what you're looking at there in that image there, that would be probably the Sarasols and Inkerman. The picture was taken just before they left or before the construction was done. Those things were constructed for the French government with a contract in a shipyard in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And I think by this time, probably 9 of these minesweepers had already been constructed and finished and shipped off to Boston, awaiting a crossing to the Atlantic for the French during the First World War. Well, in the meantime, the war ended. And if I understand this right, the war ended, and 2 days later, I think these vessels were finished. And late in November 1918, which is a bad time to be playing around out Lake Superior, they decided to send the last 3 of the minesweepers over to Boston. And the leader, all 3 of them were crossing from Thunder Bay to Isle Royale and heading towards the Sioux. And then a bad storm came up, and they decided they were going to run and hide behind the south shore of Keweenaw Peninsula to get shelter. Well, the lead vessel made it, but the other 2 vessels apparently didn't make it. And after the storm was done, a day or 2 later, the lead vessel went through the Sioux locks, and the lockmaster said, "Well, we haven't seen Sarah Souls or Inkerman." So pretty soon they figured out that they were lost in the storm. If you look at the bow, that picture right there, if you could look at it really close, you would find there's a big, tall, heavy gun platform with a big gun sitting up on the bow. And it's the same on
Oh
the
yeah, I
stern.
see it.
Yeah, it's the same on the stern. And my understanding is they were not designed to carry those guns. Those guns were added on after the design was already done. And by putting these big, heavy platforms and the guns up high, they changed the center of gravity, and that might have been why they were maybe unseaworthy in that storm, perhaps. And they also had a very small width to length ratio. They're very narrow, long boats for the design. At any rate, they were lost, and so the last person to see these was the lead ship as they were going across into the south side of Keweenaw Peninsula, probably through Passage Island Passage. And that was the last they saw them. I guess it was a snowstorm. So they're out there somewhere. And so Guy Meadows, who led this expedition, it was actually funded by crowdfunding. So we had some money to work out there for a week. And we ran out there with a different sort of a side scan sonar that we had borrowed from another university. Works a little bit better in the deep water. And we looked out for a week. We covered 35 square miles in 5 days. And 35 square miles turns out to be 1/10 of 1% of the surface of Lake Superior. So it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. We had some reason to believe why we were looking based upon the last sighting and also the wind and wave conditions at the time. But we have a couple targets that we may spend a little bit more time looking at this year during the shipwreck exploration that's going to happen next June. But we'll kind of depend on the weather because it's out there pretty far. But we'll see. It's pretty deep water out there too.
So, Stephen, you mean to tell me that during that in June, the shipwreck workshop
Exploration.
that you guys are
Yeah.
doing, you're planning on going out to the search grid for the Sarah Souls and Anchorman with the people that
Well,
are going?
yeah, we won't do the grid. We have just 1 or 2 targets, so we might just focus on just these couple of targets and run our side scan over them again and see if we can get some better images. But it's pretty deep water, and we have a limit of depth of 100 meters on our side scan, so we can only get it roughly halfway down. So it's and you're still going to be several hundred feet off the bottom. So at that point, the images are not going to be very large, but we do have 1 or 2 good targets out there we want to look at again. And I will take the people out there if the weather allows. So we'll be up in that area.
Wow, so
Yeah.
that's quite an opportunity. Honestly, if so for those of you that don't know, Captain Robley in Michigan Tech.
Losing it here, Brendan. I think we're losing it. Are you there?
Probably me.
I can hear you now.
Stephen?
Yeah, I'm here now.
Me, I'm all right. So I'm not sure when I got lost there, but it sounds like that's a real opportunity for people who want to participate in this workshop to potentially be able to go out and be there when you guys identify the Cerasols and Inkerman, if indeed that's what you have, and if weather cooperates.
Yeah. I'm not sure we're going to have the equipment necessary to get down deep enough to do an actual identification, but we'll just see what we find when we go look. So that's one of the
Wow.
things we'll be doing out there. This whole workshop is sort of based for people who aren't divers. It's based for people who don't know a lot about the technology and the processes that you use to go look for shipwrecks. And we kind of talked about this earlier. Finding a shipwreck that's not been found yet, that's like finding a needle in a haystack. That is a long, 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 expensive process. We won't spend a lot of time doing that. Mostly what we'll be doing is looking at known shipwrecks where we actually know where they're at, and then just demonstrating how we use this autonomous underwater vehicle and the side scan and the rove to actually image all these known shipwrecks. That's where we really will spend our time.
Sure, that makes sense. And for those of you who don't know, I really wish that I could be involved in it. I'm going to be on Isle Royal that week. I'm actually planning to bring my side scan out there and see if I can't find the wreck of the Dagmar off Chippewa Harbor amidst the underwater mountains out there. Long shot, but hey, I'm going to be there. I'm going to have the side scan. Might as well try.
It's always a
Um,
long, let you know where it's at.
that's right. But I am going to record a 1 hour sort of shipwreck research course that I'm going to make available to you guys for that if you want to use it. I've done that before. I've given courses on shipwreck research where I kind of go over the resources. How do you identify the remains of a ship? What are all the different things you can do? So
Yeah.
hopefully that's something that we can make use of.
Well, for the people that don't understand what the shipwreck search process is about, what they'll learn from you is that archival research is kind of where you start. And when you get some idea what you're looking for and find all the information that exists that might indicate where to look, then you can start looking. And then if you get an image, then you go back to your archival stuff and try to identify what you found. So you know how to do that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You're the
So why don't you tell me a little bit more about the workshop? What are the dates? How can people get involved in it?
Okay. I would suggest, first of all, the dates would be June 22nd through 26th. That's a Monday through Friday. We're probably of the 5 days, Monday through Friday. If the weather cooperates, we'll spend 4 days out in the lake, either imaging wrecks where we know where they're at, or part of the time we'll be out there looking maybe for the Cerasols increment. If the weather cooperates with us, we'll probably look at some of the other deeper ones out there in Pedigree, and maybe we'll take a look at the Mesquite, perhaps image that a little bit. But we'll spend a lot of time right in the Keweenaw waterway because there's a lot of stuff right in the Keweenaw waterway that's easy to access. Even when the weather may not be good, we can still work in the Keweenaw waterway and image a lot of interesting wrecks that are there. So if somebody wants to really find out more about this, I've got a web page set up. So I suggest you go to the web page. And do you have a way of transmitting the URL for that, or should I just say what it is?
Um, I'll post it on the shipwreck on the group in Facebook. So it's a closed group, so everybody who's watching us is on the group, so they'll be able to see that.
Sure.
And I'll post that tonight, right after this. And if you're interested in participating in this workshop, by all means, sign up. There is a fee, obviously, because it's going to cost quite a bit of gas for the planned, moving around of the Agassiz. And so this is, basically just, basically you're just charging cost,
Break.
for
It'll be a break even if we're lucky.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. So the more people you guys can get, the better.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
anyway, go to that website. That gives you a pretty good idea of what we're going to do, and there's a chance to get an email list there, and I'll keep people informed with occasional emails to say what's going on. So that's the way to do it. So we're going to talk a little bit. Is there time for that?
Yeah, I think there is plenty of time. If everyone will bear with me, I'm going to show a really interesting wreck that Stephen and I are both pretty interested in. We both looked at it quite a bit. And give me a second. I've been noticing that I cut out a little bit when I queue up a new image. So bear with me here if I go.
Could be a problem there, huh?
Quiet for a second. All right, I think I'm back.
I got you.
And there she is.
Fox.
So,
yeah.
So I'll give you guys a little background on this, and then Stephen can talk about it a little bit too. So this is a luxury steam yacht that is sunk in the Keweenaw waterway. I dove this many years ago and identified it with a little help from some local folks. We knew it was there because it's shown on the NOAA charts on the north side of the Keweenaw near Roblee. And people called it the Sea Fox. We didn't know why. And it turned out a colleague of my dad's, Ralph Hodek, had a picture of this up in the Onongaming Yacht Club. And it was owned by Alan Reese, the first Commodore of the Onongaming Yacht Club. It was the largest vessel ever brought to the Copper Country at that time in the early 1900s. It was built in New York State, I think, at Buffalo in, I think, 1891, around that time. And she's just sort of outlived her usefulness, and they pulled her up in the shallows. And my understanding is they just let her sort of sit there. There's a lot left to see. The stern is in pretty deep water. There's actually a bathroom, like a head. And if you go in, the old porcelain sink is still there. It's the taffrail, the stern rail is still there. It's really an interesting old ship. I've never side scanned it. We used to just go in there and dive it. And sitting next to it is another wreck. I tried to identify that other wreck by measuring the cylinder heads. It's got a triple expansion steam engine. It's a tug. I think it's a local tug. I think I identified her by her cylinder head dimensions. But there's two wrecks right there. A fascinating sight. So why don't you talk about it a little bit? Tell me what you know, because we actually haven't really compared notes about this one much.
Well, there are some local stories. And so since they're stories, we have to take it all with a grain of salt. But I have a photograph in my house. I was part of the Onongaming Yacht Club at one time myself. I have a couple photographs of the old time stuff there at the yacht club. And one photograph I have in my house is a great big barge. And people call that one the party barge. And people like James D. and Reese and all those folks would go out there to the yacht club. And they'd go out in that barge on the weekends and they'd start imbibing, I guess, and get a little wild. And they get so wild, after a while, the rest of the people in the yacht club would unhook the lines, untie the lines, and push it out in the lake just to get away from the noise. So that's a story I have about that barge there. And probably, I don't know about Reese, but James D. was one of those guys who had to do with that barge there. So that's what I know about it. I think there was a fellow named Furman, and he was a Commodore of the yacht club at one time. And he's the one that gave me those pictures. It was a picture of that barge, and I have another picture of some class racing sailboats that they were just rigging up to go out for the race. And I have that picture that I got from Furman too. He's been gone for a while. So that's what I know about the yacht club. And probably James D. was in that crowd somehow. I don't know if he was a part in the shore pushing the barge out in the lake, or he was on the barge getting pushed out in the lake. That's about all I know about that story.
Fascinating story, though. There were a lot of wealthy people up there back in the copper rush days, or what copper boom days. I just posted about the Napa Knee, the luxury yacht of Reginald Pryor that burned up in Eagle Harbor. And they were a prominent Houghton family and owned one of the big houses on College Avenue. That's a fraternity house today.
Yeah.
and that's their boat that's up on the bottom of Eagle Harbor. It took me quite a few years to identify it. I finally found the news articles, and because it wasn't registered. It was, even though it was almost 50 feet long, it was never enrolled because it wasn't a documentable commercial vessel.
Right.
But a lot of other things. So one of the things I know I'd like to do with you this spring, I'm coming up to the Copper Country to pick up my boat and bring in my side scan. And there are a couple of targets that we should go and look for together.
Let's do that with you.
One in particular that I really am intrigued by is a yacht. It's a sailing yacht. And we have an article from the Daily Mining Gazette from 1869 of a big steamship. I think it's the Northern Wave or the Northern Light, one of the two, ran it down, cutting it in two and killing two of the people on board. Right on Portage Lake, and her remains have never been found. And I have a fairly good idea of where it may have been. So it's you've already run over the debris too. But what we want to do is we want to take that historical account of that luxury sailing yacht. It was a good-sized boat being run down by that steamer, and see if we can match it up with some of the debris on the bottom.
Yeah, let's do it. And
then the other one that I know about is over on the way out to Torch Lake. And that is the tug Ed Gallagher. In 1873, they had just dredged that canal, Torch Lake. Prior to that, commercial vessels couldn't really get into to Torch Lake, to Lake Linden or Hubble or Tamarack.
Yeah, it was a little stream.
And all the copper had to be shipped by rail, over to Houghton Hancock. Well, they had just finished dredging that canal.
Kind of breaking up, Brendan.
It's sort of a buffer country. Are you there?
I am, but you've been breaking up here for a minute or so.
Okay. Yeah. It's patchy at night, sunspot activity. Anyway, they were towing this log raft, and they got into that canal at Torch Lake. And as they started coming out of the canal, the tug exploded, killing 2 men on board and scalding another very badly.
Yeah.
And I have a very good account, plus I have the 1873 chart showing the brand new dredging work. And they said exactly where it was. Now, the boiler exploded, but that big, high pressure steam engine should still be there. And I think the hull bed should still be there too. So that's another one I'd like to go and drop the towfish in the water on and see if there's anything left of her.
Well, it probably wouldn't be in the actual channel up there, would it? I mean, if it was in the channel, it would be a hazard to navigation because it's not a deep channel. At least it's not now. So I don't.
No, it's not. Well, that's one of my concerns. It's a long shot. I think it probably was removed unless it really blew up and it's really flattened. So there could just be a keel and ribs down there on the bottom. It's also possible that they came and pulled that engine out and salvaged it and just left the hull bed laying on the bottom, in which case it would still be cool to find the hull bed. But I think it's a long shot. I know within about 100 yards of where the explosion happened. So just something to rule out.
Yeah. Well, the problem in Torch Lake is they dumped all the stamp sand out in that lake. They covered about 1/3 of the surface of that lake with stamp sand. And then they pulled it all back out with the 2 dredges up there and ground it up and reprocessed it and turned it basically in something about as fine as white flour and dumped it all back out in the lake. And so that stuff got dumped back out in the lake in a very fine consistency and covered about 40 feet of depth in the bottom of the lake. So stuff that would have been in that lake is kind of gone now if it's close to the Hubble side there.
Definitely. I know many of the people in the group have seen my scan of the steamer Samoa, a big 250-foot wooden steamer that burned and sank out in Torch Lake.
Yeah.
Randy Beebe and Mark Langto, a local fellow from Lake Linden, look for that. We expected to see a great big target. Well, it barely sticks up now above the bottom, although the engine really comes up pretty high. Yeah. But it's got such a soft signature because it's covered in this big layer of slime and silt, just like you say. And it just does not want to show up well on side scan. Right. I pulled my deep vision little eye right by it, and I caught a picture of it that was decent, but very, kind of soft looking, and it's because of all that debris and all that reground stamp sand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, actually, they call it clay slime. And we sand
Clay slime.
quite a bit because we do all remediation studies in that lake and how it affects all the biological life in the lake there. So we're real familiar with that clay slime. You ever pull some of that stuff up? It looks like red chocolate pudding. That's what it looks like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's about
Yeah, I grew up there on the Keweenaw Waterway, and I used to snorkel and scuba dive it all the time, and it's just all over the place. You'd pull up your anchor, and it would just be covered with it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, any plans to take the Agassiz out to Isle Royale at all this summer?
Well, we get out there a couple times a year usually. We used to go out there more often with Bill Rose's group. He was doing geology geo tours out there. And Isle Royale is a really fascinating place because, as you know, the Lake Superior Basin is all based on volcanoes. And there's all these layers of volcanoes that formed. For example, Brockway Mountain is just one layer of one volcano. I think there's like 500 different eruption times, so like 500 layers. And the place where all these strata are most appropriately exposed for observation is on Isle Royale. And you can get to all these places, or a lot of these places, by boat. So we used to bring Bill Rose's group out there. These are all people interested in the volcanology, and show them all the different strata of all these different volcano layers and the different forms that get formed by different conditions when the volcanoes are active. So that's one thing we do out there. We used to go out there with a group of students that did some design work for the park, and sometimes you get out there with the Native American folks from Baraga, from the reservation, and they go out there for kind of retreats and spiritual reasons. So we get out there for one reason or another pretty often, a couple times a year usually. So I don't know what will happen this year. I haven't seen the schedule yet.
Sounds good. Well, Stephen, let's take some questions from our viewers. This is Captain Stephen Roblee of Michigan Tech's research vessel Agassiz. They have been doing a lot of work with shipwrecks on the Great Lakes, and as I mentioned earlier, they're having a workshop this June on the Agassiz, and you can register to participate in it. It does cost money because they have to pay for the gas. But they are taking guests out to scan for shipwrecks in the Keweenaw Waterway, and weather permitting, they may go out and ground truth targets that
Losing you there, Brendan.
they picked up.
I think we lost you, Brendan. I'm here though.
So, Stephen, one of the questions we're getting from guests here is, have any ships sunk in Torch Lake loaded with copper or in any parts of the canal?
Not to my knowledge. People always have that theory, like the treasure theory, but I suspect that I've never heard that it did happen. But if it had happened, the suspicion would have been that the mining companies would have salvaged all that copper. So that's just my thought. But I've never heard of anything that's been lost in that way there. However, you can find copper all over the place. I live right on the lakeshore in Hancock, and back in 2000 and what was it? We had low water levels in 2008, I think it was. So the water receded from the beach in front of my house a little bit, and where my house actually sits was one of the original stamp mills in the copper country. It was the Osceola Stamp Mill. And when that finally went away, then the houses were built in that site. My house is one of those houses. So in that particular, there's copper laying around from those days. So anyway, I walked down the beach in front of my house when the water level was low, and I picked up a piece of copper. It was float copper, about as big as my hand. But I don't think that ships, if they had lost any copper, they would have been looking for it and found it already.
So I know of one copper wreck, legendary copper wreck, but I think it's real. And that is the wreck of the steamer Monticello, which wrecked by Red Ridge in 1851. There's an excellent first-person account of the loss of the Monticello in the 1968, I think it's the spring of 1968 edition of Inland Seas, Journal of the Great Lakes Historical Society. There was a man named Loren Hopkins who survived the wreck of the Monticello, and he gave a first-person account of it coming ashore there and wrecking just under the cliffs at Red Ridge.
So copper ore or barrel copper or ingots?
It had barreled copper and mass copper on the deck. This is 1851. It's very early. She had come out of Ontonagon.
Yeah.
And we've looked for her. She's very fragmentary, we think. Things would have washed ashore, probably be under the beach. But offshore, we know that they were rolling those pieces of mass copper off the deck as she was coming in.
Yeah.
So in the not very far out, probably off of that area where the Monticello wrecked, is probably some big pieces of mass copper laying on the bottom of the lake. Yeah, it would be cool. We've dived around that area. The problem is there's a lot of debris from the North Entry wrecks from the 1890s, the Reed case, the Bessemer that wrecked there that were clamshelled up out of the canal and then dumped kind of over there, we think.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard to tell which of those are, if the debris is from the Monticello, or if it's from debris from these waterway wrecks, or if it's one of the other boats we know that wrecked there, the B.W. Arnold and the Bon Voyage, which are kind of in that area. But if you read Loren Hopkins' account, he talks about this big V in the sandstone in the cliffs that was just on shore and had a log across it. They got a rope to it, and that's how they got themselves to shore.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can find that geological feature, if it's still there, that's where the Monticello wrecked.
Mm-hmm.
So big piece of lore for up there if you're interested in old wrecks from, and this is before the Sulaks, 1851. The Monticello was hauled through the streets of Sault Ste. Marie by oxen, and when she was lost, it was a big hardship to the pioneer mining communities up there.
That was
an interesting one.
Before smelters.
What's that, Stephen?
Before smelters, would have been ingots. Yeah.
Definitely. Any other questions from our audience? I have one here. Anybody looking for the Sunbeam? We all know about the Sunbeam, the side wheel steamer that was carrying Charles Frigo was his name, the sole survivor who rode to shore on a barrel of port wine. The oral tradition is that he walked into his own funeral. They had shipped the shipping company when they rescued him. They shipped him off to Chicago to testify to the Goodrich Steamship Company so quickly that they never reported that he had been found. And when he got back to Ontonagon, he walked into his own funeral.
That's a good story.
The Sunbeam, though, yes, there are a small number of wreck hunters that are interested in finding it. That's all I'm at liberty to say.
Oh. Right.
Stephen, do you know anything? Have you guys ever had any thoughts about going after it with the Agassiz?
Sunbeam? No. Actually, I really wasn't very familiar with the Sunbeam. So,
she's way out there too, and people
out in the shipping lanes, I suppose.
The hard one. I've lost connection here.
Yeah.
1860. Still off.
You know what? I would be interested in finding
Okay.
someone who has a magnetometer and would like to loan it to us so we could maybe use that if we go out and look for the Sarasol's increment on that particular day. I'm not real familiar with using magnetometers for that purpose. I have used them. There's a fellow at Michigan Tech who studies the Keweenaw Fault, and he uses a magnetometer to find the magnetic orientation on both sides of the fault, thereby locating the fault. Now we've done that, but that's all done in shallow water. But I know people, of course, they use magnetometers out there for the shipwrecks, but I've never used one for that purpose. So if you know somebody that wants to use a magnetometer in that way, have them get a hold of me.
I just so happen to have a friend who has one.
Well, give them my name. We'll talk it over.
They're tricky. They're tricky devices.
Yeah.
You have to measure the ambient magnetism in the area and set a baseline.
Yeah.
But they do work. I actually wouldn't mind using one myself. I've been on a boat when somebody had one. They're called a proton precession magnetometer. They're towed. They don't have tremendous range. You really kind of have to be pretty close to the object, and it has to be a big object.
And how about depth? What kind of depths are they? Do they function in?
I think it's just a function of distance. They go through the water the same as through the air. And so, 500 feet is 500 feet, whether it's vertically through the water column or horizontally.
Right, right.
Okay. 100 yards, 300 yards is, I'm told, is the practical maximum. About when you're near an object, say the size of a school bus.
Okay. Well, that's
you have to get
technology we have not used for that purpose yet. The magnetometer that Jim DeGraff at Tech, he has a magnetometer that we use in the water, but that's only at depths of 10 feet, 8 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet. And it works for him, though. He's actually located the Keweenaw Fault that way in the water.
Very cool. I'd like to, you get one myself and use it, but they're pricey. A couple other questions came in. Any old wrecks in Lac La Belle?
Well, there are, but I'm not familiar with the wrecks. There's a pretty good wreck out in Bettigre Bay, and we may actually image that this June when we go out that way. That, I think, was another schooner barge, and I forget the name of that one, but I know that you know it.
And she's the Langham.
The Langham, that's right, yeah. I'm guessing there must be wrecks in Lac La Belle because anytime I drag a side scan around anywhere, you're going to find wrecks. And they're not always significant wrecks. You're going to find something for sure. So it'd be interesting to pull a side scan around Lac La Belle, especially on the deeper side there, and see what you can find. But I'm not.
So I know a little bit about it. There's a couple of fish tugs that were abandoned in the canal, in the Mendota Canal.
Yeah.
I don't know if there were remains on the bottom from them. You used to see them above water. Mm-hmm. But if I was to do it, I would scan in the canal there to see what's in the channel because there are probably fish tugs in there. Maybe there's some that were scuttled inside Lac La Belle too. A lot of fish tugs built in the Keweenaw by the Winnica Boat Works there at the South Entry.
Right.
And they all had to go somewhere, and a lot of them were abandoned up there in the Keweenaw. So excellent question.
Yeah.
Another
place.
Another
interesting look would be up in the Pequaming area because there was quite a bit of shipping up there at one time. There's a Ford Motor Company used to bring their freighters in there. I've never heard of a wreck in there, but I suspect there's probably some stuff over in that area there.
There is. So if you look at the old nautical charts on the southern bay there of Pequaming, there are a couple of wrecks that were shown by the old dock. Pretty good sized boats. I've not been in there to look at them. Mm-hmm. I want to. It's it's a distance to go, but there's two keels that are in there, and we've not identified them. Right. Now there has always been a rumor that there was a wreck in Sand Bay. Mm-hmm. This rumor goes back years, but now that we have that Google Earth imagery, I'll tell you, you can see the bottom of Sand Bay on Google Earth. I don't see any wreck in there.
Yeah. Well, if it was an old-time wreck and it's broken up, but they could get probably covered up with sand in there with the currents and stuff, but who knows? Google Earth is kind of fun, though, and that's one thing I'll talk about with the participants in our group. We'll spend a day probably working on computers and working on archives, and maybe we'll take a look at some of the Google Earth images. There's a pretty good wreck off South Entry there that you can see in Google Earth, and I forget the name of it, but it's just to the west of the channel there off the South Entry Lake there. I think there's a couple of them there in Google Earth.
Yeah, a lot of cool stuff to see. We have many, many armchair wreck hunters who have found really cool, new, and sometimes important stuff, and posted it on our group. And I really welcome.
Well, I think we lost it here again, but I'm still here.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this whole thing about wreck hunting, so much has changed in the last 30 years with technology. I mean, there wasn't Google Earth 30 years ago. And there may have been a few side scan sonars, and you had one, but they weren't real common. And all this technology that we're getting now is making this whole endeavor of shipwreck hunting much more interesting and in some ways easier. But still, the tough job is not imaging a wreck, it's finding the missing wreck where you're not sure where it is. And we all know that.
That's right. And I always enjoy researching and constructing the search grid. That's my whole thing. I really like to figure out what the weather was doing and where was it last seen, those kinds of questions. Put together the grid so that we can kind of know what we're doing. And I'm not great at it. I'm good at telling stories. It's one of my other fortes. Is I can write a pretty good shipwreck story, but really, people like Jerry Elias, he's got the proven track record on Lake Superior of finding things. That guy, he's got like a sixth sense for shipwrecks, because he's found some stuff in some huge search grids that have just blown my mind.
Right.
My hats are off to those guys who go out there and that's what they do for their summer vacation.
A long time run that grid.
Yeah, he and Craig Smith have spent a lot of time in their sea dory all over Lake Superior, and my hats off to those fellas. They've made some great discoveries. But I like to play in shallow water, but with a tool like the Agassiz, there's really no end to what you guys could do. There's so many cool things you can explore, so many interesting scientific questions you can answer. Just a fascinating platform to have.
Yeah,
and
the great part of it is not only do we have the platform and the equipment, but we have an intellectual capacity there. We have all these professors, and they all have different talents, and they're all good. And so we do many interesting things, not always related to shipwrecks, but really cutting edge stuff. We do some acoustic stuff sometimes and kind of interesting. And one time, give you a story here, it's not really a shipwreck story. We had a contract with a guy from another university, and all he wanted to do was go out and take samples, sediment samples from depths of 900 feet, 800 feet, 1,000 feet, pull them up. Well, what he wanted us to do is take a sediment sample, and then each sediment sample he'd take like 20 little vials, and he'd send these vials off to the University of Oklahoma. Now the story is that nobody's ever looked at sediment from this deep in Lake Superior scientifically before. Believe it or not, he was looking for a cure for cancer. So they took these vials to, I think it was University of Oklahoma, and every different bacteria that they found in there, they'd isolate it. Every fungus, they'd isolate it. Then they'd make a culture from each of these things. And they'd run these cultures against cancerous cells, find out which one affected the cancer cells. So this guy was looking for a cure for cancer in the bottom of Lake Superior. So we have all sorts of different interesting stuff that happens there. It's not that much shipwrecks, but it could be if we had a reason, more reason to do it. But we have a great place to be doing Lake Superior research. Right in the middle of the lake, we got great tools, we got great staff, people are interested, and so we get to have a lot of fun. It's a great job for me.
I know one of the things that Michigan Tech has too is a program where they offer, I think, the PhD in industrial archaeology. What a fascinating program it's got to be, and some really potentially interesting tie-ins. I came that close to going to Michigan Tech to get a graduate degree in industrial archaeology instead of going to get a second degree in computer science. And right. I still sometimes regret it, because it's just a fascinating program that Tech has.
Well, I think you probably already have a PhD in marine archaeology by now. So, but I'll keep the paper.
Shipwreckology, maybe, and self-taught. But I want to, before we go, I want to hit one question. Somebody asked about a rumor that I used to hear all the time, that there's a wreck in Keweenaw Bay with vehicles on it, with a automobile carrier that went down in Keweenaw Bay with cars on it. This is a really persistent old rumor, and I think it's based on the city of Bangor that went ashore on Keweenaw Point, and all the ship was scrapped and all the cars were recovered. There's no big wreck in Keweenaw Bay. I think there might be a little tug off the old Nestor Lumber Company dock, but I've never looked for it. The only wreck I know of in Keweenaw Bay is the Northerner, right off the dock there at Lance. So, in any event,
I have a story, and
yeah, it's a.
You probably are guessing right if you think it's connected to the Bangor story. You know.
I remember hearing it when I have a manuscript that I never published called Ghosts of Gitche Gumee, Keweenaw Shipwrecks. I wrote it well after Fred Stonehouse's book, Keweenaw. But it's been a really great. Stephen, are we back online?
I'm online.
All right, I'm back too then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sunspot activity again. I have to look at my router connection here because I'm noticing that it comes in and out. I'm not sure why, because my laptop is 3 feet away from my AC 1900 router.
Yeah.
In any event, let's wrap things up. Stephen, I want to thank you so much for coming in and joining me for this. We have a lot of really cool opportunities to work together, and I'm really looking forward to them.
I'm looking forward to working together more in the future, and I do appreciate you having me on your show here, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, likewise. And let's touch base again very soon after this. And to those of you who joined us online, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to post Captain Roblee's workshop immediately on the news group. Again, I apologize for the connectivity issues. I'm going to get that ironed out. It's our third show. And do join us next week for Jim Kennard, the legendary Lake Ontario shipwreck hunter. Jim found the HMS Ontario, 1780. The ship is from, and it's intact on the bottom of the lake. Amazing find. And Jim has found over 200 shipwrecks.
Is that the oldest wreck in the Great Lakes they found so far?
It is, definitely. And it's intact on the bottom of Lake Ontario, deep water. So Jim is a good friend. I've worked with him for years. Do come and join us for Jim Kennard next Wednesday. So thank you again, Captain Roblee, and have a nice evening. And good night, everybody.
Thank you, Brendan. Bye-bye.